West, we think that this is only applicable to the South and African American people. We need to remember that it is not. We talked about that hierarchy. So anybody who's not in that top pyramid is going to face discrimination laws by the United States. It just depends on what they are. And so we're going to shift from the South to the West, because on our West Coast for immigration, we have a lot of Asian immigration coming in. And we had talked about how the gold rush had seen a lot of Chinese laborers, and the Chinese mostly built the Transcontinental Railroad. But because of the concept that the Chinese are stealing the hard work of the white man from the gold mines, they start to pass anti-Asian and anti-Chinese immigration laws during the Gilded Age as well. And one of the first ones we get is in 1875, and it's called the Page Act. And this act, passed by Congress, is going to block entry to Chinese, Japanese, and other Asian laborers who are supposedly brought involuntarily to the United States. Additionally, under the Page Act, they are also going to block immigration of Asian women who have been brought here for the purposes of prostitution. And the only way you can get around this is if you can prove that you haven't been brought here for prostitution, or you haven't been brought here involuntarily. But there's no way to prove that. And we don't even have passports yet, so you really can't prove that. Actually, this is why we get passports. So we start with the Page Act. Now again, the Chinese are the people who built our railroad across the country. We wouldn't have that if it wasn't for them. And now that we're done with them, we're going to do the same thing we did to everybody else. I'm going to say thanks for all the help, now get out. And so in 1882, the next step, the Congress passes the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this is going to take the place of the Page Act. And so from 1882 to 1888, while this is working its way through Congress, we get the Chinese Exclusion Act, which says all future Chinese immigration to the United States is banned. And this not only puts out involuntary laborers and prostitution, but anybody who wants to come here from China as a Chinese laborer, as a Chinese person, is not allowed to do so unless they already have relatives living in this country. But furthermore, the Chinese Exclusion Act is also going to prevent Chinese and Asian immigrants from becoming naturalized U.S. citizens. So no matter how long they're here, they will never be able to become a U.S. citizen. They will never be allowed to carry a United States passport. And this is why we get passports, because Chinese people who had been living in America had to prove that they weren't Chinese nationals. And the only way you can do that is if you have a passport. And so they come up with this concept of the passport to prove that you belong here. And during this time period, if you are Chinese, you have to be inspected as a passenger before you're even allowed to set foot in the United States. So a lot of Chinese immigrants are forced to wait on the ships in San Francisco Bay before they're even allowed on land. In the East, we have Ellis Island in New York City, and we do have immigration control and all of that stuff, but it usually takes a day or two to process the European immigrants through Ellis Island. On the West Coast, we have Angel Island, which is in San Francisco Harbor, which is where most of the Asian immigrants are coming. But unlike Ellis Island, it is not a very quick process. A lot of times, the Asian immigrants are detained for weeks and months. And sometimes they're detained on the steamships. They're not even allowed into the actual detention center on the island. And eventually in 1892, the government converts the building into a detention shed so that we can shift those passengers off the steamships. But the detention shed is exactly what it sounds like. It is a detention shed. So it's not usually clean, it's unsanitary, and it's usually overcrowded because a lot of people are being held there for a long time. Typically, you're held for weeks for questioning. And you have to prove that you have family here. And so the only way you can prove that is if you can answer the questions that the customs official is asking you. And those answers have to match with what your family here says. And so These are not just your typical, like, when were you born? What color are your mother's eyes? These are questions that can be so absurd that you really have to know the family culture and the life in China to answer them. It might be a question like, how many windows did the house 3 streets down from you in China have on it? And your answer has to match the answer that the family in the US gave, or else you're not coming in, because they're going to say you guys aren't family, you didn't grow up in the same place. And so what we do see here is Chinese immigrants who don't have family here but want to come here, and so they will learn the answers of a family that's here, study them, and practice until they can match their answers together. And they will come over under a paper that says that they are family, even though they're actually not related at all. And these men will become known as paper sons, which means they are on paper the son of this family that's already here, but in reality they have no relation. They've just worked really hard and studied enough to pass this test, so they are allowed into the United States. And then once they're allowed into the United States, it's not like things are getting nicer. There is extreme racism and violence against Asian, but especially against the Chinese in California during this time period. So in our next little video, we're going to visit the Chinese Massacre of 1871, which most people don't talk about, but it deserves mentioning because it's very similar to the stuff that happens in the South. It's just a different group of people.